The Shaping of Gondor, Part 3, The Line of Earnil, Chapter 1, Earnil the Seafarer. When Taranon Falister died childless in 913, for the first time in her history, Gondor found herself ruled by one who had not been sired by a king, but rather only by a prince of Ithilien. As we have seen, Tarkirion, the loyal and ever-diligent brother of Taranon, had perished at the hands of Umbar 10 years before his royal sibling. It was the former's son, Earnil, then, who succeeded Falister upon the throne, and with him begins a new line of kings. This unlikely 13th king of Gondor was short and physically unprepossessing, having like his uncle been denied the gift of comeliness. But also like Taranon, his virtue lay in his iron character and keenness of mind, and under his rule the realm's ascendancy would continue unabated. Born in 736, Eärnil had spent his life in the shadow of his father and uncle's wars for mastery over the Bay of Belfalas. From an early age, like them, he had taken to the sea, and he shared their love of it. Indeed, Eärnil carried this affinity to the point of obsession, and there is no king in Gondor's annals more skilled in the arts of seacraft than he. So far and wide throughout the Bay of Belfalas and the sundering seas had he sailed in his years, that it was said that no mortal during the Third Age was more widely travelled. No isle of the western waters was said to be unknown to him, nor any haven of the shores of Middle-earth. It was even whispered that he had sought for the elusive Tol Menel Tarma, the fabled remnant of Numenor, far to the west over the sea. Thus he was most widely known among the men of his own day as Earnil the Seafarer, and by that title I will refer to him as well. When war was waged with Umbar during his uncle's reign, owing to his evident skill and ability, Eärnil quickly ascended the ranks to become Grand Admiral next to his father, Prince Tarkirion, and eventually the king appointed him Master of Pelargir as well. He was still serving in this capacity when Taranon's death elevated him to the throne, and to the end of his life that city would be his preferred home and base of action. Eärnil's accession, unlike the colorful pageantry of Taranon's, proved to be a sparse and hurried affair, for he had one consuming desire, the vanquishing of Umbar, and the avenging of his father's ignominious slaying by them. Indeed, the whole of his rule was to be devoted to this purpose. First, however, he had to secure his succession, for many among the Gondorian high nobility were reluctant to acquiesce to the succession to the White Throne of any other than a direct descendant of Meneldil. In the end, by the force of his personality and ambition, Eärnil was able to win over these holdouts, though it took a few years of tedious political wrangling. At any rate, by 916 the king's legitimacy was confirmed, and his hands were at last freed to concentrate on the southern adversary. It was a formidable task. Umbar was older by far than even Gondor's most venerable cities and strongholds. It contained a population greater than any other in Middle-earth, perhaps 1 million or so at that time, and commanded a fleet which outstripped all others in size and deadliness. Her harbor was large, deep, and supremely well guarded. Her walls were high and strong, her gates black and made of iron. Her inhabitants, known by some as the Black Númenóreans, due to their preponderant descent from those of Númenor who had once turned against the Valar, were both reviled and feared throughout the lands of the south for their savagery, cruelty, and fearsome skill at the arts of war. Nevertheless, Eärnil was determined to take it, and indeed there were some circumstances which now worked in his favor. For one thing, as I mentioned before, the men of Umbar had been absorbed in infighting over primacy among the various great houses of the freehold. Umbar was ruled by an elective council, headed by a Grand Admiral, contrary to Gondor's hereditary monarchical form of governance. This state of chaos had endured throughout Taranon Falister's reign, and into Eärnil's, and the latter meant to take full advantage of it in his purpose. In addition to these troubles, to the east of Umbar the tribes of Harad, likewise happy to pluck benefit for themselves, had been perpetrating a series of assaults on the hinterlands of Umbar, and this weakened the latter's defences further. Indeed, this momentary lapse of Umbardrim's strength on land and sea was to be of immense bearing on history, for it came at precisely the wrong time, just as Gondor's own was on the upsurge. Still, Earnil made no move against the south just yet. Instead, he sent about meticulously consolidating his strength. He intended to massively expand the size of Gondor's navy, and to better oversee this enterprise, he kept his court in Pelargir, rarely visiting Osgiliath or the cities of the royal ward. He proceeded to build a lovely white marble palace there, adorned with silver and emeralds. This came to be known as the Sea Palace, and it was one of the marvels of the realm. Labor was rapid, for Gondor's shipwrights were well sharpened in their skills by now, in the wake of Taranon Falister's patronage. By 923, the numbers of the navy had doubled to those that Eärnil had inherited. This was fortunate, for Umbar at last took a respite from her petty civil quarrels, and in that year struck north with a large and violent raid aimed at Tulfalas and Angard, the ports at the mouth of the Anduin. Alas for the Umbardrim, they were a decade too late. Had they managed to marshal themselves against Gondor around the time of Taranon's death, they would have faced a kingdom unsteadied by the accession of an unlooked-for nephew prince, and not fully conciliated to his rule. By this time, however, Eärnil's navy and legions were well entrenched, and both fought back with a vengeance. The king personally led the counterattack, and within a year virtually the entire Umbardran fleet was destroyed, nearly down to the last ship. The leaders of Umbar, no doubt realizing that they had overreached, sued for peace with Gondor, but it was too late, for King Eärnil wasn't having any. Umbar's corsair ships were mercilessly hunted and harried throughout the Bay of Belfalas. Every vessel was burnt, every man executed, frequently by the king's own hand in Pelargir. To salvage her pride from these insults, Umbar tried to take the offensive again in 929 with an invasion of Harondor, but were again trounced, this time after only 3 months. This proved to be the last gasp of Umbardram martial vigor for many centuries, for Eärnil responded to this latest assault upon his dominion with a counterstroke of such fury that its like had not been seen since the War of the Last Alliance. In Sulemé of 930, an armada of some 500 ships issued from the mouth of the Anduin and glided south and struck the city of Umbar like a lightning bolt. Only a portion of the latter's ships happened to be in the harbor at the time, having been sent to engage Umbar's other enemies, or else destroyed by the sea battles with Gondor. Thus all means of seaward exit from the city were blocked, and all shipments and supplies were cut off. Nor could Umbar's inhabitants count on aid by way of land, for Eärnil had had a large force of some 10,000 soldiers march south through Harondor and across Harnan to forestall any relief from that quarter, and the Haradrim preferred not to contend with them. So Umbar was besieged from both sea and land. Year after grim year the siege went on, and still the great southern stronghold resisted. Although the remnant of Umbar's corsair fleet attempted to assault the Gondorian blockade from the Bay of Belfalas, it failed, due to insufficient numbers. The beleaguered Umbardrum defenders, to be sure, fought savagely, and arrows, spears, missiles, and fireballs rained down relentlessly upon Eärnil's troops, day and night, slaying many of their number. But it was of no avail. All the valor and ferocity in the world could not put food in the larders of the Umbardrum, and by the early months of 933, having been reduced even to the vilest acts of cannibalism, the city's surrender seemed imminent. Then a further stroke of luck fell into the besiegers' hands. A cave was discovered by some means, which was connected to a small drainage tunnel from Umbar's subterranean halls. A few of Eärnil's men were able to squeeze through this aperture and gain access to the inner courts. An unguarded side gate was opened from inside, and after that the city's fall was inevitable. Gondorian soldiers poured in, and within hours the city's remaining defenders were either slaughtered or captured. The banner of the White Tree was raised above the ramparts. After a siege of 3 years, Earnil was now master of Umbar, and more fully the lord of the coasts than even Taranon had been. It was an astonishing triumph, and it altered the balance of power in the south of Middle-earth for 5 centuries afterward, for Umbar commanded the greatest part of the trade and commerce from the interior through her access to the sea. Henceforth the taxes and tributes which she had once levied on the peoples of Harad and Khand would flow instead to Gondor, generating wealth such as her people had never previously known. A large garrison was swiftly quartered in the city, and for the next couple of years the king busied himself in mopping up the last traces of resistance in the environs of Umbar. By 936, Earnil judged the task to be largely accomplished, and committed the governance of the stronghold to his son and heir Kiriandil, whilst he himself sailed north to conduct an inspection of the coasts of Andrast, where lingering corsair bands were reported to be finding refuge. But, alas, King Eärnil was never to see the shores of Gondor again. In Yevanye of 936, as he approached the coast of Andrast, a sudden storm overtook the royal fleet, and most of its ships foundered among the fiercely heaving waves. There were only a few survivors from this unforeseen calamity, and the king was not among them. His body was found, however, and solemnly embalmed after being sailed back to Pelargir. Earnil the Seafarer had reigned for only 23 years. A few years afterward, on a tiny islet known as the Isle of Tears near the location of the wrecking of the Royal Armada, a white monument was erected in honor of Eärnil's short but glorious reign. On it was scribed the ode: From the darkling chill of Foragel to the golden silence of Minneltarma, and to fell Umbar he sailed in silver arrayed. Oak and ore were his castle, valor his raiment. In the Hylene waters of Andrast here did Earnil the Seafarer find his grave, and by none among men again shall his likeness be seen, ere the world perish in thunder and flame.